so much for being here with us today. We're so excited to talk with you.
It's such a pleasure to get to connect with you again. It's been so fun collaborating together.
Absolutely. We always have such great things come out of this. So I'm so excited to get into homeopathy today and talk about all things. We're going to talk about homeopathy, mood, and headaches. So we can get started. So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit how you got into the mental health space?
I started with a mission to prove to myself that mental health symptoms could get better. I have a very long family history of depression and anxiety and complex trauma that was passed down, I would argue, epigenetically, but then also in terms of just behavioral patterns, like we do what we learned. And so, lots of depression in my family, lots of anxiety. My family has a history of addiction and suicide attempts and just a lot of emotional distress. And so growing up, that I saw in my family, I saw all of this mental, emotional stuff coming up. And then I started experiencing it. And by the time I was in college, I was on 6 different prescription medications for asthma and mood and rhinovirus, which is allergic difficulties breathing. And then, of course, I had headaches, which I know is your zone of genius. And I felt like this is my life. This is what the life of my parents have been. This is the life of my grandparents. Like this is what's been spelled out for me. And then it occurred to me that maybe it didn't have to be that way. And I kind of issued this challenge to myself. Let's see if this is actually my fate. Do I have to live a life of emotional distress? Or can mental health actually get better? And at this time, the culture was like, you go to your doctor, you take a pill for your ill. If you're really weak and messed up, you go to a counselor. But otherwise, you just kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you get it done. Because I grew up in the Midwest, very much a part of that culture at the time. So I have generally been a black sheep and I do my own thing and I pave my own way. So I got a degree in psychobiology and I went on to graduate school in Chicago and I got another degree in clinical psychology, counseling specialization. And while I was there, I remember one day it like hit me like a ton of bricks is so I'm taking all these supplements and all these medications to try to manage my moods. And I'm working at Rush Behavioral Hospital in Lake Forest, Chicago, with adolescents who were addicted to different substances. And we were doing group therapy. And there's this girl, her drug of choice was cocaine. And cocaine can be very activating, very stimulating. And so she's very anxious. And we're sitting in group therapy. It's around 8 o'clock at night. And she has a giant caffeinated canned beverage in her hand. She's rocking back and forth and expressing all of her anxiety and all of her restlessness, and she can't sleep. And my scope of practice as a counselor was to talk about the behaviors underneath of why she was choosing to do what she was choosing to do, very cognitive behavioral at that time. And it occurred to me, could it be that her anxiety could be being amplified by this giant caffeinated beverage at 8 o'clock at night? But that's out of my scope as a counselor. You really shouldn't be talking to them about diet and nutrition. You refer them to someone for that. So we referred them to the resident psychiatrist who gave this teenager who's addicted to cocaine, who's chowing back caffeine. He gave her a hypnotic sleep aid, which is a controlled substance. And my head exploded. Meg, it was like, I can't be a part of this system. Like here I am trying to prove to myself that I can get better, that my family can get better, that my patients can get better. And I have just inserted myself into the very system that got me where I was. And I got online and I just started Googling like dream words, like natural, supplements, holistic. And then the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine appeared on my Google search. And Meg, I kid you not, within 3 months, I had applied, was accepted, and was moving down to Arizona to start medical school. And that's the beginning of my journey. And it does have a happy ending where I learned about my trauma. I learned about trauma-informed therapy. I learned about the work of Peter Levine and Bruce Perry and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and Francine Shapiro and all of these trauma-informed thought leaders who were able to help round out my education that the body and the brain can in fact heal itself. And naturopathic medicine and trauma-informed medicine shows us how. And that is what I've been doing the past decade plus of my life.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think so many of us in this natural medicine space have had stories like you're saying of our own personal experience, which makes us even more passionate to help others. There's so many nuggets in there that I that I have to want to ask and comment. But one from my pharmacy background, hearing the you say the fact that they're stimulated and then actually have sedatives at night. We often see that where people are getting medications to stimulate in the day and then need the sedatives at night. And it is that pattern. So I can see why I was shaking my head when you were saying that, like, that is way too common.
It's the Judy Garland thing, right? It's like uppers in the morning and downers at night.
Unfortunately. And then the other thing is when you just going back to, because I love how you said to like your family pattern and what people are often told that, you don't want to go into like to get the help in some ways. Like, okay, you could go quietly tell your doctor and maybe they'll give you an antidepressant, but some of these, as we said, are family patterns. And for people that are in that kind of a family that they feel like they need help, and they want to make this change, but they're in this place where they don't feel comfortable. Do you have any advice before we get into other methods for people in that situation?
Yeah. Add community, add community, add community. I'm thinking about minors, a big target are minors who they are maybe living in a family that's on a flat earth and they're living on a globe and they want to pursue mental health. They want to do testing or they want to take supplements or they want to exercise. But if their family isn't on board, whether they're not giving them permission or transportation or resources, there's this almost like powerlessness that can come from that. Or if you're in a situation where there's domestic violence, or if you're in a small town and you just simply don't have accessibility, is thanks to people like you, Meg, who are putting out wonderful information, or other people whose passion is to provide education and community. Find those communities. I created a community. It's called the Holistic Wellness Collective, just for that, is to bring people together who can support each other and share resources and validate and honor and trying to troubleshoot together. And so number one is find your community, and your community is going to help you find people who are going to be more in line philosophically with what you're looking for. So another audience that my heart is very open to are friends who are LGBTQ or trans. And then when they go to the doctor, they're going to their regular doctor who doesn't respect or honor or appreciate or have any sort of resources. And so our communities, we have intentional communities that have kind of resource generated for us. And so by finding somewhere where you feel safe, you're being supported, you can get resources, that's the number one first start. And then once you've done that, then trying to find a helper who has got your back and who can give you the unique guidance that you need. So it's like number one is rally your troops, build your tribe, find your people. And then number two is then lean into a trusted practitioner. If I had to give like one type of practitioner for kind of what we're talking about, like anxiety, family trauma, is you're going to have much better success if you can find a practitioner, like a therapist who's trained in complex trauma. And generally those people are going to be people who have EMDR training, and your insurance will cover that on most cases. EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's literally the therapy that changed my life, in addition to homeopathy.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. What a great resource. Yes. So thank you for answering that. And let's move into homeopathy. So you specialize in homeopathy among other things. And so can you just tell us a little bit about what it actually is? Because I'm not sure that everyone knows or understands exactly what is homeopathy and how we use it.
Homeopathy is nanopharmacology, which I think it might be time for a nomenclature rebrand, changing the name, because homeopathy was found in the 1800s by Samuel Hahnemann during a malaria outbreak. And at that time, the primary method of treatment was to overload the suffering patient with toxic doses of substances in order to produce a different disease. And if that different disease could pull them out of the disease of malaria, if they didn't die of poisoning, they may get better. And then they found this plant called cinchona bark, which is Peruvian bark. So they got it from Peru, they put it on ships, they brought it all the way over to where this malaria outbreak was happening in Germany and the surrounding areas. So it's very expensive and it's very slow to arrive, but it worked. The problem with cinchona bark is that in high doses, it's incredibly toxic. And so doctors were kind of following their typical methodology. They were doing poisonings of the cinchona bark. People would either die or they would actually heal. But that was our best bet. And so Samuel Hahnemann is looking around, and he's a doctor, and he feels like this whole thing is mayhem. And he also is an expert at biochemistry, and he edited scientific journals in organic chemistry. And so what he decides to do is he decides to do an experiment to see if there's a better way to use this plant medicine, because they were thinking that the bitter properties were why it was working. But the problem was there were other plants that had more bitter aspects to it, and they didn't work as well. So Hahnemann knew there had to be something else, but we didn't know what it was. And so what he ended up doing is he diluted it a little bit. He gave the patient less, and they still got better. And so then he's like, well, why would I poison people? It's unnecessary. I'm going to give them less. And he's like, but what if I give them a little less? So thus begins the scientific process where he dilutes it and it works, and he dilutes it and it still works. And so then he's super pumped, right? And he's got all his diluted remedies, and he's driving his horse and buggy, and they're jostling around down the dirt road, and he's taking them and giving them into his patients. And then Hahnemann notices something very peculiar. He notices that the remedies that he delivered worked significantly better than the ones that he'd made in his office and people came and procured. So he's like, why would that be? Maybe there's something to this jostling bit. So he develops a process called dilution and succussion. And so you dilute it and then you shake it. And mathematically, we are able to kind of use nomenclature and determine how many times something has been diluted and succussed. And so when you look at homeopathic remedies, like if you go to the health food store, you may see arnica, and you may see arnica 30C, arnica 200C, and the 200 or the 30 and the C, that's the mathematics of how many times this has been diluted and succussed. So what Hahnemann discovered during this whole story of homeopathy is that we can dilute something to non-material doses beyond Avogadro's number. So there's technically nothing there, but information is there. And when we match the information of the plant to the information of the disease of the person, if they're identical bits of information, the person gets better. And so here's the problem with that. We didn't have the science to back up why this works. And so everyone's running around and they're like, how could nothing do something? This is straight up placebo, which for some people it could be. But then over the past 200 years, we've used homeopathy successfully with psychosis. We've used it with babies and infants. We've used it with animals. And they get better without the placebo effect if they don't know that they have it. So it can't just be placebo, right? There's got to be more to it. And so with the research advancements of nanopharmacology, just kind of circle back why I call it nanopharmacology, is that we are now able to look at the molecular imprint of the original substance and see that it has changed. So having had something there, it's kind of like if someone with perfume walks by you and they're gone, but you can still smell that they had been there. There's no person there. There's nothing there, but just the information from the remains of their perfume. It's kind of like that. And then that information is enough to change our biophysiology if it's matched. So the homeo part of homeopathy, the homeo means like, And then the pathy is disease. So it's similar suffering or similar disease or like disease. And so homeopathic remedies are very unforgiving, that if you don't match the symptoms identically, it won't work. So with malaria, if somebody, and this is all in the history of Hahnemann's proving too, which I skipped over for time, but Hahnemann did a poisoning on himself. And when he ate a whole bunch of it just to see what would happen, is he developed symptoms identical to malaria. And so if the plant or the natural substance that you're using in a poisoning could induce the symptoms of the disease that you're trying to cure, they will get better. And so I saw that in action when I was a medical student. This girl came in and I'd never heard of homeopathy. I'm a Midwesterner. That doesn't exist out there. It was a miracle I was at medical school at SCNM. And I'm on my first clinical rotation, and this is probably in like 2007. And this girl came in and she had horrible Crohn's disease. And for your listeners who don't know what Crohn's disease is, it's a very, very awful gastrointestinal disease that can cause hemorrhaging and pain from the rectal glands, from the rectum. And it's just awful. And her life was reduced to curled up on the floor in front of her toilet in pain. And nothing had worked. She'd seen surgeons. They took out her terminal ileum. She'd been on medications. Nothing was working. So she came in as a last resort to try this goofy thing called homeopathy. And my teacher took her case, wrote down all of her symptoms, just like if we were doing a poisoning, right? Everything that's happening, all my symptoms. So I have bleeding and I have cramping and it's bright red blood. And it has a peristaltic cramp that starts in the back and it works its way forward and it squeezes and it twists, like every little unique detail of her pain. And then her emotions, because it's mind, body, spirit. And then he picked a remedy called Natrum Muriaticum. And when she came back for her follow-up, Meg, I kid you not, her symptoms were gone.
Wow.
And I was like, what the actual hell is this? And that moment changed my life. And I dedicated my life to being a master at homeopathy. And I still know that girl. In fact, I texted with her. She's a friend of mine now. This is many, many years later. She's a friend of mine now. And she's still symptom free. And it took an $8 little sugar pellet that people call a placebo to cure her Crohn's when nothing else had worked. And that's why I'm here today talking about homeopathy and how it can help you.
Wow, that's amazing. So now do you, as far as if you need to see someone, for someone listening that would be interested in using homeopathy, do they need to see a practitioner that specializes in homeopathy to get that correct match?
Yeah, it's kind of like if somebody has a really bad headache and then they just like go to any, like, so let's say they have like terrible migraine headaches with aura and they go to an ENT, like the ear, nose, and throat doctor is going to be like, well, this is a little bit out of my scope. So you want to go to somebody whose area of specialty is that. And then I would even argue, like, find a classical homeopath whose area of focus is what you're looking to get corrected, because homeopathy is such a vast, complicated system that you want someone who focuses in on exactly what you're doing. So mental health, like there's probably 4 homeopathic mental health practitioners in the country that I would recommend. If it's migraines, homeopathy is really effective for migraines. But you want to make sure that the person that you're seeing is really experienced with that. Otherwise, it's like the tool is good, but it's only as good as the practitioner is.
Exactly. Okay. So that's not something necessarily that someone can just say, okay, I'm interested in homeopathy. I want to try this out and go to, the local pharmacy or, or health food store and pick something to try to match them. They need to see someone specifically to get the correct match.
That's how you're going to get the most likely success. It gets a little more complicated, and not to go down too much of a rabbit hole with you, but there's something we call Bell-Gray's curve, which is, it's shaped like a bell. And so we have the x-axis and the y-axis, and the y-axis represents the potencies. And so the bottom is the 6C, and then it's 30C, 200C. And so the higher the potency, meaning the more dilute a remedy is, the more specific you have to be in getting it right. The other ones, the lower potencies, that x-axis is the different remedies. And so most people will react in some way, shape, or form to a close but not quite right remedy. And so you can go to Whole Foods or Sprouts or a health food store, and they have a little book there, and there's over 3,000 remedies that can treat headaches, but they've pulled out the most common ones. And you can look at your symptoms and be like, oh, well, it's throbbing in my temples and it comes on at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I can't stand noise, light, and sounds. Oh, it could be belladonna. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you have a decent chance at getting a good one, but seeing a practitioner is going to give you so much more of a chance of success.
Gotcha. Okay. So, and are there any risks of using homeopathy?
There are no risks. There are no medication interactions. The only thing is that anything that provokes a healing response could have the potential. It's kind of like if I take a liver supplement and I drink alcohol, that's provoking my liver to theoretically detox the alcohol more efficiently. So sometimes when we do get healthier, our symptoms can change a little bit. So for example, I have a lot of people with homeopathy. Now, homeopathy doesn't cause low blood pressure. However, if you're on high blood pressure medicine, you start getting healthier with homeopathy, you might find that you're over medicated and you have to bring your dosage down. So while there aren't any risks or any side effects, it could, in a sense, change the way that your body in a disease state is metabolizing by pushing it out of a disease state.
Yes, I run into that a lot too. That even thyroid, once you balance the thyroid and you work on everything else, it's like you no longer need as much thyroid medication. And so the same kind of thing. So when you're doing these changes, that's for sure something that's a good side effect though.
Exactly. It's what
when
we
you're
want.
feeling like you're healing, that's always definitely a benefit. So
Yes.
you use a lot of these homeopathic remedies for moods too, correct?
Yes.
Do you have any recommendations that people could try if they are struggling with anxiety or moods or it's mood swings or anything like that? If it's something that is general, I know you don't have to be more specific, but people listening could think, oh, maybe that's something I'm interested in.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the more common ones. And so let's start with aconite. Aconite is a remedy that, again, you can get all the ones that I'm going to talk about. You can get them all at the health food store. And so aconite is really good if you have just sheer terror and panic. It's like a panic attack. It's sudden, it's extreme, and there can be such a sure, like, I'm so sure that I'm going to die that I'm probably going to die at this time. Like the anxiety is so intense that they will predict their death. Like they're so sure that they're going to die. Such extreme anxiety about their health. And oftentimes people who need aconite are very restless and inconsolable. I did a rotation at an ER many years ago during my residency. And there was this man who was in a hospital bed. We were walking by. I was with a little herd of little residents following the attending. And there's this man, and he was rocking on his bed. He was withdrawing from opiates. He was rocking in his bed, and he was like, I'm going to die. Help me. I'm going to die. It's coming any minute now. I'm going to die. Oh God, help me. And he was just suffering so terribly. And I was like, oh my God, that man needs aconite. It would help relieve the suffering so much. But I was doing residency in an insurance covered hospital in Iowa. And so I didn't get to give him aconite. But that's a good case of that's aconite. So if you're dealing with just like sheer panic, you're inconsolable, you're sure it's over. So that's one remedy. We just talked about belladonna a minute ago. Belladonna can have a lot of anxiety, and belladonna is a great headache remedy. So a belladonna case is, I have a patient, and when she's frustrated, she's like going through a lot of frustrations in her life, but she can keep her chill. She can keep her cool, kind of flat. And then bam, out of nowhere, it's like the last straw that broke the camel's back. And she goes from 0 to 60 in a second. And then when she goes to 60, she's angry, she's hot, she gets throbbing in her temples, she gets throbbing in her forehead. She feels like she just needs to scream or punch something. and she's got burning pains in her body. It's just very intense, very violent, very sudden. And then it just goes away. She just like can take a breath and it goes away. So it's like sudden onset of whether it's pain or it's emotional upset, whether panic or anger or sad. And it's usually very violent in nature. Whereas aconite has that more frenzy to it. Belladonna it can have a lot of that heat and anger and hatred and frustration and violence in it. Belladonna and aconite are similar in that they're all sensitive to lights and noise and smells. And so if you find that you're generally quite overstimulated, then one of those remedies might help. But let's talk about kiddos, right? Homeopathy is such a good asset for kids, because when you have this child and your child is anxious, or they have, their tummy hurts or their head hurts, and you don't want to just give them a pharmaceutical, homeopathy is a really great alternative, and kids really respond well. So let's say that you have a little one and you had the news on, you were cooking dinner and you had the news on, and the little one saw something on the news that was like a little bit scary. And so that night, little one is trying to go to sleep, but they can't get it out of their head what they saw on TV. And they're so worried. And what if this happens? And I'm so sad. And this was so worrisome. And I don't know what to do. And then they're like sweaty and they're clammy and they just like really want reassurance and they want your hug, but they're like pretty nervous and pretty irritable. A great remedy for that's calc carb. Okay. So calc carb is great for those who are incredibly sensitive to hearing sad stories, hearing about cruelties. They get worried and anxious, sweaty, want consolation. Calcarea babies tend to be like very sweaty little guys.
Oh, yes. No, that's so helpful, because I agree with kids. It's so, you don't want to give them pharmaceuticals, or it's always, I think moms are always thinking like, what can I do to help them? And all of us have been in a situation. Even, would you say a nightmare? Would that be another way to, like, would you think to use that same thing for a nightmare?
Absolutely. I've treated so many kids with nightmares. And when you're looking at nightmares, you want to try to figure out what time of the night is it happening. Are they having nightmares when they first fall asleep? Because that's a different remedy versus if it's late in the morning. What's the theme of the nightmares? Is their brain perseverating over fear of disease? Like Calcarea is very nervous about getting sick. Or is it more like images of faces, like they're just like seeing a lot of faces, or their eyes are playing tricks on them at night and they're scared? It might be more phosphorus or stramonium. So getting the flavor of the nightmares will help you find the remedy that will work for them. And with kids, oftentimes you're going to see results either that night or within the next 2 nights after that. It'll work fast.
Okay, I guess that's a good question to ask you then, for what is the average time that people would expect to see this working?
Think of it as the more violent and acute and sudden, the body has to respond with equal amounts of intensity. So I had a patient come in, I was working at the med center in Tempe, and we had this mom come in with a toddler who had a scorpion sting, because I worked in Tempe for a long time. I was in the desert. There's scorpions. So this little one had a scorpion sting. They took her to urgent care. Urgent care is like, you got to go to Phoenix Children's. Phoenix Children's like, this sucks. We can't really do anything about it. You just got to give her some ibuprofen and it's going to work itself out of her system. And so then the mom brought her to the naturopathic clinic. And so looking at her case, is she was fine, like just kind of hanging out in mom's arms, like clearly not happy, but chilling in mom's arms. But then suddenly she would have this jolt of agonizing pain, and she would scream and turn bright red, arch her back, really high pitched scream, body's really hot. And then suddenly it stopped. So I gave her belladonna, because belladonna has that heat, that violence, that suddenness, that intensity. And she never had another attack again. They left. We had her hang out for another half an hour and she was fine and she played. Her fever went down. She was chill. Never had an attack again. It was good. So when it's an acute disease state like that, the body will respond. A healthy body will respond quickly, especially kids. But if it's something really chronic, so like my story is, girl, I've been anxious for 39 years. And so my anxiety journey, it's been chronic. Like, it's a process of 2 steps forward and then 1 step back and 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And I always tell people, it's like, imagine that you have a mountain. At the top of the mountain is when you're all better, when you're free from anxiety, when your gut no longer torments you, when you feel like your energy is great and your sleep is great. That's the top of the mountain. And we're starting down here, and you should be progressing the entire time, but it's going to be a process, and we're going to have to change it. Sometimes you may be in a state that looks like belladonna, and then that may change and it may look like calcarea. So we just got to watch it, and then you'll heal. And so where I am and present in my life is I don't have generalized anxiety anymore, but I do stress myself out because I say yes to all of the things. And so then that's pulling me back out of my healthy state. My lifestyle is causing disease, right? So I still use homeopathy to combat poor choices.
I get that. I'm with you.
Yeah.
And I mean, everyone, I guess that's a good point. So we all have stressors. Is there one that you recommend in general for something like that, where you have those life stressors going on?
It's however your body manifests the stress. So
Okay.
the people that you see, they manifest their stress and headaches.
Mhm.
And so you would find the remedy that matches the
Just
way that they suffer from stress,
gotcha.
versus the people who see me tend to manifest their stress and panic and anxiety. And so it's like oftentimes a different, I kind of call them cat farms of cows. Like, those are the brown cows. These are the black and white spotted cows. Like, you have a cow over here. These are the anxious cows. And we got
Uh-huh.
to zoom in on the specific one for you.
What about people that just have that kind of chronic underlying general anxiety?
Yeah, you have to find something characteristic about it. So
Okay.
if we look at the Materia Medica is this beautiful book where every symptom of every remedy that we have is written down, and it's categorized by body system. So like, if somebody overdoses with caffeine, let's say you've meet your friend for dinner at the cafe, they were already there pre-gaming on all of the mochas. So they've been chowing back mochas, and they're like a little bit cracked down on caffeine, right? You can detect that because you probably know what caffeine overdose looks like. So in their head, you have symptoms of their thoughts are racing. Maybe they're a little anxious, or maybe they're like a little bit fast and distracted and buzzy. But then you might also see that their hands and their nervous system, their hands are shaking, right? So their muscles are shaking, they're trembling. And then in their gut, they might actually get diarrhea. And so they may be running to the bathroom with loose bowels because they overcaffeinated. And so with the Materia Medica, it's head to toe. It's all the symptoms. And so then what we do, if someone has generalized anxiety, is we do a head to toe assessment. I spend 2 hours with people doing this. And we try to find the most unique thing, because lots of substances can look like I had a little too much sugar. So if you have a kid who comes to you, she's a little too much sugar, like, it really could be chocolate, it could be granulated sugar, it could be ice cream, but if she had a specific stimulant that, oh, this is caffeine. She had chocolate that had little nibs of cacao. There's caffeine in this sugar. I know this. Then you get the right remedy that matches it. So there's no generalized anxiety remedy. It's, you got to match the symptoms.
Okay, I love that. So very specific. So you dig in like I do and ask a million. I always say I ask a lot of questions.
Yep.
And they're like, that's
The
okay.
nosiest
But
persons.
yes, I know. It's like our like question after question. But I
Yeah.
think really in the same way, getting to that root. What is the root? When we want to, once you find
Yes.
that root, you can really make such a difference for so many people.
Oh, it's the most amazing thing. It's like, what is the main thing and the main thing and the main thing? It's like, what's the worst, the deepest stuff, like going in there and being so brave to really pull that out and explore it. That's what's going to get your life back. Otherwise, it's like mowing the lawn and wondering why weeds grow back. Like, let's get
Exactly.
in, let's pull that
Yes,
weed
yeah,
out.
we gotta pull those weeds out. And I also loved how you said about climbing the mountain, because I think a lot of it, we live in this fast-paced lifestyle. People think like, oh, I have to do it quickly, or you expect fast results, and it is a one, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 step, and you just keep climbing that mountain, and it happens. But there is that level of patience and acceptance of where you are and going on that journey.
Yeah, I had a prospective patient ask me like how many people, so I'm helping her with withdrawal from benzodiazepines. And she asked how many people get better. And I said, probably like 80% of my patients are successful. And she said, well, what happens to the other 20%? Why aren't they successful? And really the main thing that I run into is that they're just impatient, that we're suffering so much that we can't really endure for long. And I think we've been, in a sense, almost spoiled by psychiatry and pharmacology because these medications are made specifically to cause a pretty immediate effect. Like, I am anxious, I take a benzo, anxiety is gone until the benzo wears off.
Yes.
But healing isn't always like that. Like that little toddler with the belladonna, like that was pretty instantaneous healing. But oftentimes with chronic stuff, you just have to be willing to be patient, and you can actually heal.
And that's what I agree with you. It's like, we're going to heal it and not have it come back, rather than just treating what's going on and having it stay there underlying. So once you can do that, just take some time to get there. But you have provided so much great information. And if people want to connect with you, Nicole, how can they get in touch with you?
Find me on Instagram. We respond to all of our messages. We're here to support you. And then in the link in the bio, I have tons of free goodies. We have the Wellness Collective, which is a membership that I'm doing. So it helps, because seeing a lot of specialists in these areas can be cost prohibitive for people. And so as an answer to that is I created a really low cost membership where you have access to me for less than a daily cup of coffee.
Well, that doesn't happen very often, to be able to talk to a provider for less than your Starbucks.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, thank you for asking. I'm Dr. Nicole Cain. That's my Instagram.
Dr. Nicole Cain. So you can go over there, and she has her membership coming up, and it starts in June, right?
We started it actually.
Alive.
It's live. Our first session was last week. Today I'm doing a Q&A. We talked about thought anxiety. So when we have like intrusive, racing, obsessive, annoying, negative, and otherwise bothersome thoughts, like what do you do about it? So that was last week. And then this week, I'm actually going to be connecting with my members and answering their questions.
Oh, well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming and giving us all this great information.
Thank you, Meg. It's such a delight. You're the best, sister.
You too. Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.